All right. So I'm Tammy. I know she already said that. My husband John is here. He's in the back. He's an usher this service. My husband John and I have been attending this church for almost 3 years now with our 4 children. And I've been on staff here as the children's director for 2 of those years. And before I get started, I just want to say that your kids are awesome. They are smarter than me, and they know Jesus because you guys are amazing parents, and you guys are really doing the work. And as much as I love being in here on this stage, I much prefer the stage back there because they're way more fun. They're louder, they interrupt a lot more, and when they get a little antsy, I make them stand up and jump around, and that's always a good time. And every service ends with candy, and candy makes everything better. So like Pastor Naomi said, we do have a little bit of an elephant on the stage. Pastor Naomi is a very kind and gracious boss. She has never once hit me that you know of. And my husband is also a kind and gracious human. He's never yet hit me because I could beat him up. But here's the thing. I'm like a giant child, and I love to roller skate, and I do it really, really fast, and I'm really good at it until I'm not. And then you fall really hard and you smack your face on the ground and there's stitches and broken elbows and such. And so if y'all can keep praying for me, because after a certain age, they don't cast your broken bones because they're afraid you're going to seize up. And they tell you things like, maybe you shouldn't skate anymore. Maybe you should give that up because you're almost 50 and move along. But the truth is, I'm going to go skating again. It just won't be for 6 to 8 weeks if I can stay out of surgery. So if you guys can pray for me, please do that. All right. So today I want to talk to you about a journey. This is a journey of more than 800 miles to a land that I had never been to before. A journey that we embarked on because we had a burden. A few years back, God told me to move to Twin Falls. Here's the thing. I hate it when people say, God told me, because I'm a natural skeptic, and I want to say, like, well, how did God tell you? Did he write it in the clouds? Did you hear an audible voice? Did you get an email, text message? Did it come in the mail? Like, how does God speak to you? So please know that I say that with a lot of hesitation. God told me to move to Twin Falls. But through a series of odd coincidences, John and I come up with the idea that we need to move, and that move should be to Twin Falls. Did we know of anyone in Twin Falls? No. Had we ever been to Twin Falls? No. Had we ever heard of Twin Falls? Still no. There was really no reason for us to be here, but we had a thought, one might call it a nudge, that we wanted to move, and that place, that destination should be Twin Falls. Now, the real estate market in Twin Falls in late 2020, early 2021 was booming. People were buying houses for thousands of dollars over asking price with cash. And John and I have never purchased a house before, and we had no money. And, you know, the benefit of that is no one told us that it would be really hard to buy a house in a market like that. So we were like, hey, let's move to Twin Falls. That sounds like a great idea. And you know, not only did we not have money, and we'd never been here and didn't know anyone, we were almost homeless where we were living. We only had a place to live because of my parents. We lived with them for many years before we came here. And in that time, we were able to pay off debt and things like that. But for the most part, like, we had no idea what it was to buy a house, and we had no money to do so anyway. So this nudge was random and not something that I would have expected to come up with on my own. As we were thinking really about moving, we were planning it as if we had won the lottery. And you know how when you dream about winning the lottery, you're like, if I win the lottery, the first thing I'm going to do is buy the church new carpet. If I win the lottery, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to buy cars that run every time you turn them on. You know how you do that? Like, that's how this nudge to move to Twin Falls started. We started dreaming about living in a place where it didn't feel like thousands of people were breathing our air. We dreamed about a place where we could send our kids to school, like a public school, and not be afraid of what they're going to be taught. We dreamed of this place that we had never been to, we had never heard of, and we had no money. I don't know if I was clear. We had no money. We had no family here. There was no reason, right? But this nudge just got bigger and bigger, and the excitement started growing in us. And come January of 2021, I was like, look, if we don't actually take steps towards this, I'm going to have this hope deferred. Do you know what that is? That's when you get your hopes up and then you put it off, and it's kind of heartbreaking if it doesn't come true. So we were still like very much in like COVID social distancing nonsense where we lived at the time. It was very strict. So we weren't allowed to go to church on Sunday mornings at the beginning of 2021. We were able to go on Saturdays. They had to reduce every congregation. So we sat 6 feet from everybody with our masks on starting in January of 2021. And that really freed us up Sunday mornings to attend church online. So we started looking for churches in Twin Falls and the surrounding areas in January of 2021. So great thing about live stream is you can just pop on to a live stream and you can pop out without hurting anyone's feelings. So we went to many churches. By popping in, we'd stay for a few minutes, we'd pop out, we'd try another one. For whatever reason, and I can't even speak intelligently about that right now, for whatever reason, we popped into Full Life Family Church and we stayed. And we started attending this church in January of 21 via live stream while we were still attending our church on Saturday evenings in real life. So that's step one, right? I'm getting excited. That nudge is getting bigger. That burden is growing, and I don't know why. So what are we going to do? Maybe we should go to Twin Falls. So we have this conversation, like, let's go to Twin Falls, and let's make sure that people aren't crazy there. How about this? Let's go to Twin Falls and make sure that when you're at the park on a 60-degree day, that the wind doesn't blow and stab you in the ear and make you wish you wouldn't go outside. Let's do that, because that could happen. It's a real thing. Twin Falls has wind. I don't know if you've heard. I had not heard. So whoopsies, we don't have any money, but we want to go to Twin Falls, and we want to spend a decent amount of time there to see if it's somewhere we'd want to be. So one day, my husband says, hey, you know what had happened was Joe Biden decided that you have a lot of kids and you need money to stimulate the economy. So he gave us a nice little check. It just magically appeared in our bank account, and we had the funds to go to Twin Falls. So we jump on the Airbnb website. We get an Airbnb. It was an excellent location. It was an excellent price. And that's the nicest thing I can say about it. We got this Airbnb, and we loaded up our kids in our one running car, and we drove to Twin Falls. We got here on a Friday in March. And on that Friday, we went, of course, where does everyone go when they come to Twin Falls first? To Walmart. We went to Walmart. That's the truth. We did not know there was a giant waterfall. Have you heard there's a big ditch over there? Like, we had no idea. That's a thing. So we go to Walmart and we buy the kids toys because we're trying to bribe our children. I'm not above bribing children. That's why I have the job I have. So we want our kids to think of Twin Falls and think, oh my gosh, that place is amazing. We got toys right when we got there. So we take them to the park and we play. That's a Friday. The Saturday, we did the same thing. We went to a different park. Again, pretty much not knowing there's this giant waterfall over there. Yeah, it was March, though, because it wasn't on. We did end up going there eventually. So Sunday morning, we wake up, and I wake the kids up to bring them to church, because we know what church we go to. That's the only thing we know. Right? We know we're going to come to Full Life Family Church. And I tell you what, I have 4 kids, and kicking and screaming, they were like, no, I will not go to church in real life. I don't want to. Can't we just watch online? We don't want to move. We hate it here. It's cold. The wind stabs your ears. Like, it gets you right in the ear. And John and I said, you know what? You don't have a choice. You got to go. We got all dressed. We show up here. We throw them in the back. Tara was the children's director at the time. She was teaching the class. We threw them all in one classroom, I think. I don't even think they were the right age for the classroom. Tara just said, I'll take them all. I just pushed them all in one room, and I ran. And we came in here, and we sat. And Pastor Jeremy was preaching on being useful where you're planted. It's a very innocuous message, right? We all want to do that. We want to be useful where we're planted. And Pastor Jeremy said, when you move, you need to move where God tells you to move. You need to move when God tells you to move. You need to buy the house that God can pay the mortgage of. You need to move and be useful when you get there. I tell you what, I looked at my husband. Pastor Jeremy said move at least 16 times in that service after I started counting, because it became comedy. Like, I looked at my husband, I was like, did you call ahead? Did you tell him we were talking about moving? Like, why is he yelling at me? He's telling me to move. Sorry, I have to move up. So we get up and we are leaving church, and we go to get our kids from kids' church, and our kids that came in kicking and screaming ran out and said, will we be here in time for Vacation Bible School in June? So, like I said, it was a little nudge. Maybe God told me, and I was like, do you think this is a sign from God? And my husband was like, yeah, I think we should call a realtor. And I said, okay, let's call a realtor. How do we find that? So we Google, we get a realtor. And then she says, hey, you need a title company. And I was like, what's that? So she gives us the name of a title company. We call. We get pre-approved. That's a thing. Who knew? And here's the thing. We have no money. We've never bought a house before. And so we get a first-time home buyer's VA loan. Now, some of you know what that means. I still don't know what that means. But essentially, in the market that Twin Falls was in, no one would take these loans because the VA requires you to jump through too many hoops. And people were paying cash for houses, thousands of dollars over asking, and the VA is not going to loan you money for more than what your house you're buying is worth. So the realtor was like, it's not happening for you. And I said, well, we should try anyway. So John and I started directing our prayers like, Lord, can you be clear with us? Because I'm very skeptical. Like I said, and God isn't speaking from the clouds, right? I said, God, just open every door you want us to walk through and close tight every door you don't want us to walk through. And so from Monday, when we were pre-approved, to Friday, so 5 days, we attempted to look at several houses. Now, some of them we couldn't open the door. There was a app problem, so the actual door was locked and we couldn't get in. Some of them weren't actually for sale. So we'd go in houses that weren't actually for sale. I don't know how that's possible. Looking back, it seems impossible. At the time, I was like, oh, it must be a thing that happens. Who knows? I've never done this before. We went onto construction sites where we kind of broke into houses, I feel like. But, we were with the realtor. She obviously knew what she was doing. She did not. But the long and short of it is, by Friday night, we were feeling pretty discouraged. We got in the car, and I was like, this probably isn't going to happen. And I was like, no big deal. I guess it wasn't God's nudge. It was just us dreaming. So we had a nice vacation. Friday night, the realtor called us and apologized. And she was near tears. She was talking about, did you check my Google reviews? You probably know. I'm not so great at this. I'm really new. I've been going through some things. And I was like, nope, didn't check any of that. All I know is you're the realtor God gave me, and if God's going to put us in a house, he's going to use you to do it. And she said, well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I said, don't get me wrong. I have no confidence in you. But I do have all the confidence in God, right? If he wants us here, he'll put us here. And she said, okay, well, there's this one more house. Come look. One more house. So you guys probably get where this story is going, because obviously I'm standing here, right? Essentially, we walk into this huge house. I laughed out loud, friends. This is our starter home. Our starter home has 5 bedrooms and 3 full bathrooms. Our starter home has a view of a farm that I feel like no one's breathing my air. Our starter home came with a guy that shovels my sidewalk. Are you kidding me? There's a guy that shovels my sidewalk. Yes, that's a thing. I didn't even know to pray for that. Our starter home has an open concept, so when we have Connect Group, there's room for 14 of you to sit around our couches, and we can entertain. This nudge became a burden. This nudge became something where I can't even begin to tell you the miracles that happened that got us here. I can't begin to tell you the things that happened that tried to get us away from here. We broke contract on this house 5 times. 5 times these people could have pulled away, and they didn't. They didn't because God said move. And like I said, the skeptic in me wants to say God didn't say, but all that accumulated to me being in this place, to the journey of more than 800 miles, where we put our kids in the car and we drove them from the only home they had ever lived in, away from all of our family, all of our friends, on this journey to a place that God led us. And now I'm standing here on the stage. I'm standing here on the stage to share this burden that God has given me with you. All right. So we're going to go to Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah begins 15 years after the book of Ezra ends. That's almost 100 years after the first captives were taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. So here's a really quick like Reader's Digest version of this story, for those of you who don't know. Israel had given themselves over to idols. And God said, essentially, hey, if you're going to worship idols, I'm going to put you in the land of idols. So Babylon took over Israel, and they did it in multiple waves. And as they took the people captives, they destroyed the cities. They destroyed the temple that Solomon built. They destroyed everything. And that land sat empty. So it was left to like ruin, like weeds and rust. And those captives were in Babylon for more than 70 years. So for 70 years, this war-torn country was left to weed, right? And the Babylonian kings, the one king, he did something dumb, and the Medo-Persian king Cyrus was able to conquer Babylon. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, he said, all you Jewish people who want to go, you can go back to your land. So imagine you're 70 years or more in captivity, and there's about 2 million Jews in captivity at that time. And those Jews are like, okay, let's go. But only 50,000 wanted to go, because other ones were like, we're chill, it's cool. But the only people that know where they're going, because this is more, I Googled this, okay? So as far as I know, Persia, which was Babylon, right? Babylon became Persia. Persia became Iran. Iran, according to Google Maps, is 1,300 miles from Jerusalem. Now, I went on a journey of 839 miles, and I used my GPS the whole time, and I took a car. I don't think they had a GPS. I don't think they had MapQuest. They probably were without a Thomas guide, and any person that had ever been to Jerusalem that was there was over the age of 72. So Zerubbabel, he's the first guy. He's like, I'll lead the charge. And he heads them out to Jerusalem, and they get there, and it's like hostile. There's people everywhere that want this land. I don't know why everyone's always fighting over Israel, but they want the land, right? But Zerubbabel's there, and he starts with an altar. So he builds this altar to make a sacrifice. Now, to be clear, all the altars of the Old Testament point you to the cross of the New Testament. So every time they build an altar, what they're doing is they're sacrificing for their sins. They're asking for forgiveness. And the altar is the cross. So we started last weekend at the cross, where we remembered that Jesus paid the price for our sins, so we don't have to build an altar. So after they built the altar, they sang a song from Psalms 126. It's "The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy." Anytime I can, I try to relate the Psalms back to where they were sung, because it shows you that God's there in the midst of all the things. So they're rebuilding the temple. It takes them like 21 years. And then they stop. Now, this story is incredible. I encourage you all to read it. There was all kinds of enemies surrounding them. There were all kinds of terrorists. They were fighting them. They were infiltrating. They were getting onto their teams. Like this story is intense. It's really fun to read. But 50 to 80 years go by, and Zerubbabel is probably dead. I have no idea how long he lived, but you figure if he was in his mid-20s and now 70 years have gone by, he's 100, almost 90. Like, this guy is probably old, right? And Ezra, under the rule of Artaxerxes, says those people need to get back to work. Now, remember, Ezra is a scribe. So the scribes, they're the smart ones. They write down all the words of the Bible, and they had to do it perfectly. The guy knew his word, right? So he is a preacher. One of my favorite podcasters says the people of Israel needed to get back to work. And what gets them back to work? It's good preaching. Ezra takes Haggai and Zechariah, and if those names are familiar to you, it's because they're actually books in the Bible. So he takes these preachers to Jerusalem, and they start preaching, and then they teach the Jewish people that are there the customs of old. They remind them. So now, here we are at the beginning of Nehemiah. All right, so we're going to read Nehemiah 1 through 4. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hekeliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So Israel is surrounded by enemies. They're in constant danger. The local terrorists are attacking. And Nehemiah hears of it, and he gets a burden. He begins grieving. He begins grieving for a people and a place that he is from, but he's never been. He begins grieving because of the burden that God put there. It's a God-given burden, and it stops him in his tracks. And he sits down. He's overwhelmed. He weeps and he mourns for days. He fasts and he prays. He does so because he has a sense of destiny. He has that sense that God has a plan for his life that is bigger than he is. A sense that I am a God-ordained person, and I have a God-ordained purpose, and I am born for such a time as this. It is my prayer, friends, that every single one of you would have a burden like this. So, born for such a time as this always reminds me of Esther. Now remember, I said Ezra and Nehemiah, for that matter, were sent under the rule of Artaxerxes. The king before Artaxerxes was Ahasuerus, and you might remember that name because Ahasuerus is who Esther was married to. Esther was a Jewish woman, and Nehemiah grew up, and he was part of the royal court. So he was probably very much influenced by Esther. So when Hananiah, hang on. Let's go back. Let's talk about Nehemiah. Let's talk about where Nehemiah was living. He was living in Susa. Susa is the winter palace. Now imagine having a palace to live in when it gets too cold outside. If it's too cold, I'm going to my winter palace. My thought, I've never been there, but my thought is, sounds tropical, right? This is where Nehemiah lives. And his job is cupbearer. Cupbearers, if you don't know, they're the guy or gal, I guess it was probably always a guy, that eats the food and drinks the wine before the king. So if it's poisoned, the king doesn't die, the cupbearer dies. So yeah, there's an imminent threat of death constantly hanging over his head, but literally his job was to eat and drink. And his only burden at that time was to look good doing it. And I tell you what, sometimes it's hard to look good, but he was given a burden. And God linked Nehemiah's heart to God's heart. And God linked Nehemiah's heart to a need. And that need caused Nehemiah to weep and fast for days. In the first service, Tara was praying and she said, if we are so focused on what God can do for us that we miss out on what God wants to do through us, we're missing the big picture. We don't want to sit with the bridegroom and hear the people knocking to be let in and asking why we didn't tell them. I'm here to tell you about the nudge that brought me here, the nudge that turned into a burden, the burden that wakes me up in the wee hours of the morning and pulls me to prayer. I have been praying for the children of the Magic Valley and the families that they're in. I am praying that the children would know they were created for a purpose, that the one who created them did so because he did not want to live without them. He wanted to spend eternity with them in fellowship. The burden I have is that the children would know that God doesn't make mistakes. He wasn't confused when he made them. There was no accident. He didn't forget what gender he wanted them to be. My desire is for my heart to be attached to God's heart and to be attached to a need. I want to make an eternal impact. I may be unqualified, just like Nehemiah. I may be unqualified, but I know that God equips his servants for the call that he puts on their life. Nehemiah left his palace and went to Jerusalem, and he built a wall with no power tools, with no knowledge of the trade. He built a wall in 52 days. 52 days. And 2,000 years later, you can go see the wall that Nehemiah built. God is calling you. It's a God-sized call. It's messy. It's hard. But he wants to link you up, your heart up with his heart, and link you together to a need. All of us must learn that the key to effective ministry in a church is not a gifted pastor, but it's a gifted body who uses their gifts to do the things that God intended them to do. So now I'm asking you, what is your burden? What is your God-sized call? And are you willing to step out and do what God is calling you to do? We are all called for the purpose of growing the body of Christ. We all have a part to play. We as a body are weaker if you do not step up and answer the call on your life.